I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath and try to recall a very specific smell from your childhood. Perhaps it is the earthy, roasted aroma of barley tea sweating in a glass pitcher on a humid summer afternoon. Or maybe it is the sharp, savory scent of soy sauce sizzling in a hot iron pan. Today, we are taking a gentle journey back in time, returning to the 1970s, a remarkable period in Japan. We are going to remember 20 incredibly cheap, simple foods we ate when our pockets were empty. We will rediscover the textures, the sounds, and the profound emotions tied to these humble meals. And please, stay with me until the very end, because the final food we will remember is not just a meal. It is the purest, most touching symbol of a mother's unconditional love. Before we explore our memories, let us pause to remember how time used to flow in the Showa era. The days felt longer, unhurried, and perfectly measured by the rhythmic ticking of a mechanical clock on the wall. We lived without the endless distractions of glowing screens and instant messages. If you wanted to speak to a friend, you walked to their house or dialed a heavy black rotary phone, hoping their parents would answer. There is a common misconception today that because we lacked modern technology and vast wealth, our lives were somehow poorer. But you and I know the truth. Our lives were incredibly rich in sincerity and human connection. Waiting for a pot of rice to cook, sitting together under the warmth of the kotatsu table, sharing a single roasted sweet potato on a freezing evening. These moments required patience, and that patience made every small reward feel like a miracle. Poverty in those days did not mean despair. It meant resourcefulness. It meant finding extraordinary joy in the most ordinary, inexpensive things. And now, let us begin our journey with a dish that defined the very essence of a humble morning in 1970s Japan. I am talking about the beloved raw egg over rice, or tamago kake gohan. Picture the early dawn light filtering through the frosted glass of the kitchen window, casting a soft glow on the cold linoleum floor. The floral-patterned rice cooker, a proud centerpiece of the counter, would click, sending a puff of starchy, sweet steam into the crisp morning air. When money was tight, a grand breakfast was out of the question, but we never felt deprived. You would take a small chipped ceramic bowl and fill it with that steaming, glossy white rice. Then came the egg, a precious commodity that we treated with the utmost respect. You would crack it gently on the edge of the bowl, watching the golden yolk and clear white settle over the hot grains. The sound of chopsticks vigorously whipping the egg into the rice, creating a frothy, pale yellow cloud, was the soundtrack of our mornings. A careful drizzle of dark, rich soy sauce completed the ritual. The warmth of the rice slightly cooked the egg, creating a creamy, savory comfort that coated your mouth. It was not just a meal to fill an empty stomach. It was a warm embrace before stepping out into the cold streets to walk to school. We ate it quickly, the heat radiating through our small bodies, entirely unaware that this simple, inexpensive bowl would one day become our most treasured culinary memory. Let us turn our memories to the sweet aroma of the neighborhood bakery and a humble treat known as pan no mimi, or fried bread crusts. Do you remember the cheerful jingling of the bell as you pushed open the heavy glass door of the local bakery? The air inside was thick with the intoxicating scent of yeast and baking flour. In the 1970s, nothing was wasted. The bakers would trim the crusts off the soft white bread used for sandwiches and bag them up. For just a few copper coins, or sometimes even for free, if the baker knew your family well, you could carry home a bulging plastic bag of these precious scraps. The real magic happened in your own small kitchen. You would heat a splash of cheap cooking oil in a worn, heavy iron skillet. Throwing the crusts into the hot oil, they would sizzle and pop, transforming from dry scraps into golden, crispy ribbons of joy. While they were still piping hot and glistening with oil, you would dust them generously with coarse white sugar. The crunch of that sweet, greasy crust echoing in the small kitchen was a symphony of simple pleasure. It was a dessert born of necessity, yet it tasted better than any expensive pastry. It tasted of resourcefulness, of a mother's desire to give her children a sweet treat, even when the family purse was completely empty. Do you recall the repetitive, soothing sound of the wooden katsuobushi shaver? We are remembering neko manma, lovingly known as cat rice. In many households, buying expensive cuts of meat or fish was simply impossible. Instead, we relied on the large, rock-hard block of dried bonito. The shaver was a sturdy wooden box with a small drawer and a sharp blade on top. It was often the job of the children to sit on the tatami mat and shave the fish. The rhythmic scraping sound filled the quiet afternoon, producing delicate, dusty flakes that smelled intensely of the deep, salty ocean. You would take a bowl of hot, leftover rice and pile a generous handful of these pale pink shavings right on top. The magic happened in the next few seconds. The rising steam from the rice would catch the delicate flakes, making them curl, twist, and dance as if they were suddenly alive again. A quick splash of cheap soy sauce over the top was all it needed. The salty, rich umami flavor soaked into the white grains, creating a meal so rustic and basic, yet so profoundly satisfying. We called it cat rice, with a fond smile, knowing perfectly well that it was a feast fit for a king when you were hungry and had nothing else. Let us think back to the bright, almost unnatural pink color of the gyoniku sausage, the iconic fish meat sausage of our youth. Wrapped tightly in clear plastic film and sealed at both ends with stubborn orange metal clips. This was the ultimate cheap protein. Do you remember the intense frustration of trying to bite off that little metal ring with your teeth because you could not find the scissors? Once you finally tore the plastic away, you were met with a smooth, rubbery cylinder made of finely ground fish paste, colored to look vaguely like real meat. We would eat it just like that, straight out of the wrapper on our way home from school. But it was even better when Mother sliced it into thin rounds and fried it in a pan. The edges would curl up slightly, blistering and turning a beautiful dark brown. The heat transformed the rubbery texture into something deeply savory and satisfying. It found its way into everything, from scrambled eggs to our simple school lunchboxes. We knew it was not real ham or beef, but we did not care at all. That distinctive, slightly artificial savory flavor was the taste of the 1970s, a cheerful compromise that brought protein and joy to countless struggling families across the country. Now, let us remember a dish that carried the lingering shadows of the post-war years into the 1970s. We are talking about suitong, the simple flour dumplings. For many families, this was the ultimate survival food. On bitterly cold winter nights, when the wind rattled the sliding window panes, the family would huddle tightly around the kerosene heater. Mother would take a bowl of plain wheat flour, add a little water, and knead it into a sticky, rough dough. There was no measuring, just the practiced intuition of hands that had cooked through difficult times. On the small stove, a thin broth of soy sauce and chunks of cheap daikon radish would be simmering. She would use her fingers to tear off irregular, sticky lumps of the dough and drop them directly into the bubbling liquid. As they cooked, they expanded into dense, chewy dumplings. The bowl of suiton was heavy, starchy, and completely devoid of luxury. Yet, as you swallowed that hot broth and chewed the dense dough, a profound warmth spread outward from your stomach, chasing away the winter chill. It was a dish that reminded our parents of harder times, but for us children, it was simply the comforting, heavy taste of a quiet winter evening spent together in the small, warm center of our home. Can you still smell the intoxicating aroma of hot oil drifting down the street from the neighborhood butcher shop? Let us talk about the humble potato korokke, or croquette. Walking home from school, your stomach would rumble violently. If you were lucky enough to have 20 or 30 yen jingling in your pocket, the butcher shop was your destination. The display case held these golden, oval treasures, freshly fried in heavy lard. You would hand over your coins and receive a single, piping hot croquette wrapped in a thin piece of paper. As you walked, the grease would slowly turn the paper translucent. The outer shell of panko breadcrumbs was spectacularly crunchy, while the inside was entirely filled with incredibly soft, sweet mashed potatoes. There was barely any minced meat inside, perhaps just a microscopic speck here and there for flavor, but it did not matter. You would blow on it desperately to cool it down, almost burning the roof of your mouth as you took the first massive bite. The contrast between the savory, oily crunch and the fluffy, steaming potato was absolute perfection. Sharing half of that croquette with a friend on the dusty road home was an act of true friendship, a delicious memory forged in the golden afternoon light of the Showa era. Let us remember another masterclass in cheap, satisfying eating, the ever-reliable chikuwa. These hollow, tube-shaped fish cakes were a staple in every frugal household. They were inexpensive, readily available, and incredibly versatile. Do you remember their distinct appearance? The wrinkled, beautifully browned skin on the outside, and the pale, spongy white fish paste on the inside. When eaten raw, they had a fascinating, rubbery chewiness that squeaked slightly against your teeth. But the real genius emerged in how we stretched them into a proper snack. You would take a fresh, crisp cucumber, slice it into long, thin spears, and push those spears directly into the hollow center of the chikuwa. Then, you simply sliced the tube diagonally. The presentation was charming, and the texture was brilliant. The soft, savory chew of the fish cake perfectly contrasted with the cold, refreshing crunch of the cucumber. We would dip these little rings into a tiny dish of soy sauce, perhaps with a microscopic dab of sharp yellow mustard. It was a snack born entirely out of the need to save money, yet it felt sophisticated to our young minds. It was the perfect companion to a quiet afternoon, sitting on the porch and watching the clouds drift by. Now, let us transport ourselves to the suffocating heat of a Japanese summer and remember the icy thrill of kakigori, the shaved ice from the local sweet shop. When the cicadas screamed so loudly you could barely hear yourself think, you would run to the dagashiya, clutching a 50-yen coin. The shop owner had a massive, heavy cast-iron machine sitting on the counter. Do you remember the sound it made? The metallic, grinding scrape of the heavy blade shaving the massive block of pure ice. It sounded like winter itself. The shop owner would rotate the large wheel, and a mountain of pristine white snow would pile up into a cheap, thin plastic cup. Then came the syrup. It was impossibly bright, neon red strawberry syrup that tasted absolutely nothing like a real strawberry. It was pure sugar and artificial coloring, but to us, it was the nectar of the gods. You would scoop a large spoonful into your mouth, and suddenly a sharp, agonizing brain freeze would strike right behind your eyes. You would squeeze your eyes shut, waiting for the cold pain to pass, only to immediately take another bite. It was a brief, freezing escape from the heavy summer humidity, a colorful memory melting quickly under the blazing sun. As we transition from the heat of summer to the freezing depths of winter, we must remember the haunting, melancholy whistle of the yaki-imo truck. The roasted sweet potato cart is a memory etched deep into the soul of anyone who grew up in that era. On a freezing dark evening, you would hear that drawn-out, musical whistle echoing down the quiet streets, followed by the smell of burning wood and caramelized sugar. It was a scent that commanded you to run outside. You would rush out with whatever small change you had gathered. The old man running the cart would reach into the hot stones and pull out a charred, purple-skinned sweet potato. Because money was tight, you rarely got one all to yourself. You would carefully break the steaming potato in half to share with your sibling. As it broke open, a cloud of glorious, sweet steam rose into the freezing night sky, revealing the vibrant, golden flesh inside. It was incredibly hot to the touch, forcing you to juggle it from hand to hand. The taste was intensely sweet, almost like natural candy, with a smoky flavor from the roasted skin. Eating that sweet potato under the glow of the streetlights was a moment of pure, unadulterated winter magic. Let us recall a gentle, soothing remedy that served as a treat when there was no money for real candy. We are remembering kuzuyu, or hot starch tea. Often this was given to us when we had a fever or a sore throat, but sometimes, on a very cold afternoon, a mother would make it simply because the snack cupboards were completely bare. The process was wonderfully simple. You took a spoonful of cheap potato starch or arrowroot powder, mixed it with a generous mound of white sugar in a thick ceramic mug, and poured boiling water straight from the kettle over it. The crucial part was the stirring. You had to stir violently and quickly with a metal spoon. As you stirred, the milky water miraculously transformed into a thick, translucent, viscous jelly. The texture was slippery, heavy, and delightfully sweet. You would blow on it gently, taking small sips, feeling the thick, warm liquid coat your throat and slide heavily into your stomach. It held the heat incredibly well, warming your core from the inside out. It was a humble, inexpensive concoction, yet the sheer comfort it provided, especially when made by a caring mother, was richer than any store-bought medicine or fancy dessert. Do you remember the dusty, magical atmosphere of the neighborhood dagashia, the penny candy store? Let us talk about kaware senbei, the broken rice crackers. The candy store was a paradise for a child, filled with large glass jars of colorful sweets. But when your allowance was nearly gone, you had to be incredibly strategic. Whole, perfect soy sauce crackers were a luxury. Instead, we bought the bag of kaware senbei. These were the factory rejects, the crackers that had shattered during baking or packaging, sold for a fraction of the price. But here is the wonderful secret that only we knew. The broken ones were actually much better. When the crackers broke before the glazing process, the dark, savory soy sauce would seep deep into the jagged, broken edges. Those rough edges absorbed twice as much flavor, making them intensely salty, deeply caramelized, and overwhelmingly delicious. You would sit on a stoop with your friends, reaching into the crinkly plastic bag, hunting for the smallest, darkest, most heavily glazed pieces. It was a brilliant lesson from our childhood. Sometimes, the things that are broken and imperfect hold the most intense and wonderful flavors. Let us bring our minds back to the small kitchen, where the sound of sizzling oil promised a savory feast, even when meat was entirely absent. We are remembering sosu itame, the Worcester sauce fried cabbage. Meat was a precious luxury in the 1970s, often reserved for paydays or special occasions. On a regular Tuesday night, a mother had to be incredibly creative to satisfy hungry children. She would take a large, cheap head of green cabbage, shred it roughly, and throw it into a smoking hot metal wok. As the cabbage wilted and the edges began to char slightly, she would douse it heavily with thick, dark Worcester sauce. The moment the tangy, sweet sauce hit the hot metal pan, it caramelized instantly, sending a huge cloud of savory, vinegary smoke filling the kitchen. The smell was identical to the glorious yakisoba noodles sold at the summer festivals. We would eat this aggressively seasoned cabbage over a massive bowl of white rice, closing our eyes and letting the rich, salty sauce trick our minds into believing we were eating a luxurious meat dish. It was a brilliant culinary illusion, a testament to the magic a mother could perform with just cabbage, sauce, and a hot fire. Do you remember the sheer size and confusing texture of a fugashi? This giant, airy wheat bran stick was a towering giant among the cheap penny candies. For just 10 or 20 yen, you could buy this massive, dark brown cylinder that felt suspiciously light in your hand, almost like holding a piece of dry wood. The outside was heavily coated in a thick, dark crust of melted brown sugar. When you took your first bite, the crust would crack and shatter loudly against your teeth, but the inside was entirely different. It was a dry, porous, sponge-like wheat gluten that instantly melted the moment it touched your tongue. The contrast between the hard, aggressively sweet molasses shell and the dissolving, earthy center was fascinating. It left a deep, roasted sweetness in your mouth, a flavor that felt ancient and rustic compared to the brightly colored chewing gums of the era. Eating a fugashi was a messy affair. You would inevitably end up with sticky brown sugar crumbs all over your shirt and fingers. But licking that sweet molasses off your fingers while running back to the playground is a memory of pure, unadulterated childhood joy. Let us recall the ultimate remedy for the suffocating, relentless heat of a Japanese summer and a clever way to silence a hungry stomach. We are remembering the giant glass pitcher of cold mugicha, or roasted barley tea. During the summer break, when the heat was so thick you could barely breathe, the refrigerator held this precious treasure. The large glass pitcher was always covered in a heavy layer of condensation. When you came inside, exhausted and sweaty from playing, you would pour yourself a tall glass. The tea was incredibly dark, almost resembling black coffee, with a deep, earthy, roasted aroma. It was completely unsweetened, yet it had a complex, comforting flavor that immediately cooled your blood. In many households, drinking massive amounts of cold barley tea was also a secret strategy. When lunch was small and dinner was still hours away, a rumbling stomach was simply told to drink more mugicha. The heavy liquid filled the emptiness, providing a temporary, cooling relief. That roasted scent of barley tea is forever intertwined with the sound of buzzing cicadas, the feeling of sticky skin, and the long, lazy afternoons of a Showa-era summer. Do you remember the rebellious, crunchy joy of eating dry, instant ramen straight from the packet? When the afternoon hunger struck and you could not wait for water to boil, or simply because you craved a salty snack, the cheapest square of instant noodles became the target. You would take the brightly colored plastic packet and instead of opening it carefully, you would smash the dry block of noodles with your fists while it was still sealed inside. Once it was crushed into bite-sized fragments, you tore open the top. You would carefully extract the small silver packet of salty soup powder, tear it open, and sprinkle the entire contents directly over the raw, dry noodles. Then, gripping the top of the bag tightly, you shook it violently. The result was an incredibly crunchy, overwhelmingly salty, and deeply savory snack. The dense crunch of the fried noodles echoing in your skull, combined with the artificial chicken or soy sauce flavoring powder, was highly addictive. It was a snack strictly forbidden by most mothers, which, of course, made it taste absolutely phenomenal. It was the ultimate fast video, born from impatience and a desperate craving for salt. Let us bow our heads to the ultimate symbol of austerity and simplicity, the single pickled plum on a bed of rice. We are remembering the umeboshi and the iconic Hinomaru bento. There were days when the household budget was stretched so incredibly thin that even an egg was a luxury. On those days, the lunchbox consisted of a rectangular bed of plain, white rice, with one fiercely red, intensely sour pickled plum placed precisely in the center, mimicking the Japanese flag. The umeboshi from those days was not the sweet, honey-infused varieties of today. It was aggressively salted and agonizingly sour. The trick to surviving this meal was rationing. You would take the very tip of your chopsticks and pinch off a microscopic sliver of the red plum. You put it on your tongue, feeling the intense tartness force your eyes to water and your cheeks to pucker. While the sourness exploded in your mouth, you would quickly shovel in a massive bite of the plain white rice to balance the flavor. That single plum had to stretch to flavor the entire meal. It was a masterclass in endurance and appreciation, teaching us the true value of every single grain of rice. Do you remember the cool, slippery sensation of tokoroten on a humid evening? This simple agar jelly noodle dish was the essence of refreshing simplicity. When the heavy summer air refused to move, a small bowl of tokoroten felt like a cool breeze. The magic lay in the preparation. The firm, transparent block of seaweed jelly was placed into a rectangular wooden press with a wire mesh at the bottom. With a firm push of the wooden plunger, the block was instantly extruded into dozens of long, crystalline noodles that fell softly into a small glass bowl. The visual transformation alone was thrilling, but the true character of the dish came from the dressing. We doused the transparent noodles in a sharp, dark mixture of rice vinegar and soy sauce, perhaps with a tiny dab of vivid green mustard on the edge of the bowl. You would slurp the noodles loudly. The sharp tang of the vinegar hit the back of your throat, waking up your exhausted senses, while the icy smooth texture of the jelly slid effortlessly down. It was a dish with virtually no calories and cost almost nothing, yet it provided a priceless moment of cool relief in the dead of summer. Let us remember a sweet treat that we created with our own hands, using the most basic pantry staples. We are talking about sweet kinako paste, made from roasted soybean flour. When the dagashia was closed, or when we had absolutely 0 coins left, we turned to the kitchen cupboards. Kinako is simply roasted soybeans ground into a fine, dusty powder. By itself, it is dry and chokes you if you breathe it in. But we knew the secret alchemy. You would put a few spoonfuls of the pale brown powder into a small dish, add a generous mound of white sugar, and then carefully add just a few drops of water. You had to be very precise. Using a small spoon, you mixed it relentlessly until it transformed into a thick, sticky, heavy paste. It smelled incredibly nutty, like deeply roasted peanuts. You would scrape the paste off the spoon with your teeth. It stuck to the roof of your mouth, forcing you to savor the rich, earthy sweetness slowly. Scraping that small ceramic bowl perfectly clean to get every last sweet, nutty grain is a memory of pure childhood resourcefulness, proving that you do not need money to create a moment of genuine happiness. Can you recall the blinding, vibrant crimson color of a freshly fried benishoga tempura? For those who grew up in the western regions of Japan, this was the undisputed king of cheap, satisfying snacks. Benishoga is the sharp, vinegary, red pickled ginger, usually relegated to being a tiny garnish. But to save money and fill empty stomachs, we elevated it to the main course. The bright red strips of ginger were coated in a simple, heavy yellow flour batter and deep fried in hot oil. The visual contrast between the bright yellow batter and the stark crimson ginger was beautiful. Served in a greasy paper bag, it was heavy and substantial. When you took a bite, the thick, oily crunch of the batter was immediately pierced by the sharp, acidic, spicy bite of the pickled ginger inside. The vinegar cut perfectly through the heavy grease, creating a violently flavorful combination that woke up every taste bud. It was cheap, it was unapologetically bold, and it was the perfect savory treat to eat while walking through the bustling, narrow alleyways of a Showa-era neighborhood as the sun went down. Finally, we have arrived at the most profound and precious memory of all. It costs absolutely nothing. Yet, it is the most valuable food in existence. I am talking about the humble shio musubi, the pure salted rice ball made by a mother's hands. There is no filling here, no expensive salmon, no pickled plum, just plain, steaming hot white rice and coarse white salt. Do you remember watching her make it? She would wet her bare hands with cold water to keep the rice from sticking. Then rub a pinch of salt vigorously across her palms. She would scoop up the incredibly hot, freshly cooked rice, her hands turning red from the heat. With swift, gentle, practiced motions, she pressed the rice, turning it round and round, forming a perfect, firm triangle. When she handed it to you, it was still radiating heat. As you took a bite, the salty crust hit your tongue first, followed by the deep, sweet, comforting starch of the rice. But the true flavor was something invisible. It was the warmth of her hands, the absolute care in her pressing, the quiet sacrifice of a mother ensuring her child never went hungry. That simple, salted rice ball is the absolute essence of our childhood. It is the taste of unconditional love. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, it becomes clear that we do not just miss these cheap, simple foods. What we truly miss is the era they represent. We long for the days when time moved slowly, when human connection was our greatest wealth, and when a simple salted rice ball felt like the greatest feast on earth. The 1970s and 80s taught us that joy is not found in money, but in gratitude and shared moments. I hope this journey back in time brought a warm smile to your face and perhaps a happy tear to your eye. If you enjoyed remembering these precious times with me, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a gentle like. It truly helps us keep these memories alive. And now, I would love to hear from you. What was the cheapest, most beloved food from your own childhood that you still think about today? Please share your beautiful stories in the comments below. I promise to read them all. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves and never forget the beautiful, simple flavors of your youth.